President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him is a reminder that every White House, regardless of party, is capable of deception. But being truth tellers also means telling the truth about ourselves. We, myself included, missed a lot of this story.
All right, you just heard his voice there telling us to all do better as journalists. So let's start with asking him the hard questions. Alex Thompson, Axios national political correspondent and the author of the book, you can see it over his left shoulder if you're watching us on YouTube, Original Sin, about President Biden's cognitive decline. Alex, Mike, and Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us.
Great being here.
So, Alex, you know, we were talking a bunch about this off air, and I purposely, this is something I didn't tell you, I have not watched any of your interviews specifically with respect to the book tour. I wanted to kind of Larry King this and come in a little fresh and not, I mean, obviously I know who you are and stuff like that, but I did watch one thing, as I was telling you, of Jake Tapper. We're going to get into that in a second. But why don't you tell our audience, because we've talked about this book when it came out. I happened to be on CNN Newsnight when the Her investigation report came out and the audio tapes that your publication release came out. Huge conversations, arguments about all of this. So why don't you take all of our audience inside? First, what made you want to write the book? And B, I think a lot of this is the chronological timeline here. Like, when did people know that this was a cover up?
Yeah, so I'd say, honestly, the book was Jake's idea. And he raised the concept with me on set, on the CNN set. And I like to say, you know, Jake and I were friendly, but we weren't like, let's write a book together friendly. We just didn't know each other that well. But, you know, I'd been covering Biden's age and the way that the White House apparatus was gradually sort of morphing to, try to meet his limitations over the course, especially of 2023, 2024. So why write the book was Jake was like, I think there's more to this story. And I agreed. And, you know, I had published a bunch of stories about Biden's age, but we just felt there was more here. And we also felt that the most consequential decision and moment of the 2024 election was Joe Biden deciding to run for re-election. If you wanted to understand how Trump was able to return, you had to understand not just what he was doing in the background and the way that he basically brought the Republican Party back to heel in the aftermath of January 6th and 2020 and the pandemic, but you also had to understand how the Democratic Party enabled his ability to come back. And that was by, trying to prop up an 81, 82-year-old man who was saying that he could be president till January 2029 when the voters were making very clear that they weren't buying it. So those are, in terms of the timeline, we basically started the book without any interviews, no book deal, no words written on November 6th. We turned in the rough draft on January 31st because, we it was not like I mean, to your point, like, Joe Biden is not president anymore. We wanted to make sure to get this out as soon as possible.
Alex, I'm going to ask you now to sort of think of two versions of yourself. Be the version of us that's watching the debate in 2024 when it was basically at that point, the regular public sector knew Joe Biden probably should, leave the race. Compare that to the person you are in doing the research. In leading up to that debate and what we saw as, and people can call it cognitive decline or just unpreparedness, whatever, where did those two versions of you meet where you realized that there was so much building up to why the debate performance went the way it did? Because I use that as the entry point often in this conversation, because that's the one that essentially everyone officially was on board with the idea of this is not sustainable in terms of a candidate's electability. But what was that sort of junction point for you?
Yeah, so I would say what our reporting shows is that the Joe Biden we saw on a debate stage there were moments, and not just one or two, there were many moments of that Joe Biden behind closed doors and with increasing frequency, especially in the 9 months or so before the debate. All our reporting shows that, I mean, we all saw them. There were moments of like, huh, that's like a weird thing to say, or a weird like lapse, or like a weird sort of like senior moment or whatever. Going back to 2019 when he was asked about reparations, and he starts talking about having young minority kids listen to the record player. Like he had moments of that, but then by 2023 there were all these moments, and what you saw is the White House began shielding him from other members of the staff, and anytime he had some big public moment, they would rest him. They would make sure that his schedule was cleared, that he would be able to, go down and have dinner. We have months of internal schedules. Sometimes he would go up to the residence and have dinner at 4:30 p.m. After starting the day at 10. And, before the debate, the week before the debate, they had him rest at Camp David. And what happened is, they were trying to manage, like any sort of old person who has good days and bad days, good hours and bad hours, they were trying to manage those on the highest of stages. And um, you know, I was at the debate. There was no audience, so I was among all the reporters, and I remember, not being surprised that he was struggling, but I was surprised at the extent of whatever you want to call it, the decline, that he was having moments this bad behind closed doors, the extent of it, and the way they were trying to hide it. And, I think they expected that he would rise to the occasion, just like he did at the State of the Union a few months before. But, their luck ran out.
Alex, let's stay on the cognitive decline phrase in all of this. I was telling you this off air that I worked at Fox News for a few years. I go on the network occasionally. I have friends that are on air talent at the network, producers at the network. In 2019 and in 2020, when a network is saying someone is cognitively declining and every segment is featuring cognitive decline, and then they happen to be right 5 years later, is that a sign of cognitive decline? And then on the flip side, you wrote an article recently about Gavin Newsom in California, and he said that Donald Trump right now is not the same person that he recognizes from 2020. Can we all say right now that Donald Trump is cognitively declining because he fell asleep in Saudi Arabia in front of the crown prince, because he almost fell down on an airline thing, because he couldn't open a box in front of the White House press briefing room? Could we all say those things? Can you demystify? And I'm very agitated by this, because the Kayleigh McInerney's of the world and all these folks that go on Fox News that are sitting here, and Lara Trump wanting Jake Tapper to apologize. You were not right back then. You were an ass for doing that, because you work for a network that was disseminating those points to counter the Democratic talking point. You don't get to call that you were right 5 years later, when at a debate, like you said, he looked like he was off his rocker, for lack of a better term. So can you kind of demystify where's the point right here where you can kind of say, hey, you guys were wrong, you were dead off on that? And then what do you make about the article? Tell us a little bit about Gavin Newsom saying that Trump is starting his cognitive decline.
So two things. One is, our reporting shows in the book that, there was a decline or slippage in Joe Biden from 2019 to 2019 to 2020. But it was not what the right wing machine was saying it was. I mean, they were saying he was basically a brain in a jar in 2019, 2020, and that was not true. What our reporting shows, that there were moments that even gave his own aides pause, where, he would just be very, very tired. He would forget the name of his longtime aide, Mike Donilon, who he known since 1981. There were moments of, like, I mean, for lack of a better, senior moments, or moments where aides would be like, huh, but they were few and far between, or at least that the ratio was not really troubling to most of the people around him. And what happened by 2023, 2024 was much different than what was happening in 2019, 2020. Like again, it's like a very classic story of aging. People like the good days and bad days, the ratio changes over time. The bad days become more frequent, and the bad days are also worse, and the good days aren't as good. I mean, that's what was happening here. And also, the thing about some of the right wing or conservative media, I would say that I find frustrating with the victory lap that they're taking. Which, listen, they were right. They were right to be like the mainstream media did not hone in and focus and investigate this enough. But also, it's not reporting to just like air clips of Biden making gaffes all the time. The sort of work that I was doing was getting people like real people inside the building to tell me about how the White House was having to adapt to his limitations. The fact that they couldn't get meetings on the schedule, even privately, very often after a certain time of day or early in the morning. And it was frustrating people that his energy was so limited. The fact that people had real concerns that he could make it till January of 2029. I mean, that was sort of while the conservative media was right that there should have been a lot more curiosity. It's not like they were breaking huge investigative stories on this of what was going on behind the scenes.
So, as a citizen, Alex, I do have to ask, in the midst of what we saw as cognitive decline, was there any time in your reporting or just any in the information that you were gathering in this book, were there questions among the White House administration as to who are the other people that the president has to lean more heavily on or may have to potentially defer, or were there ever moments of decisions being deferred to others?
I mean, by the last year of the presidency, we talked to multiple members of the cabinet that had concerns that he would be up to, the proverbial 2 a.m. crisis phone call, and felt that he would have to basically rely on the office of the presidency to handle it. Which, in that case would be the National Security Advisor, Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs, sort of the infrastructure built around a president. But it was really striking, in conversations that there were a significant number of Democrats and people inside the administration that had doubts of whether or not Joe Biden was really up to the job in 2024, that last year of his presidency, um, which really surprised me. And your broader question of like, yeah, I mean, I do think as a result of his sort of limited energy and everything else, like from the very beginning, his top staff had more power than if he had been 20 years younger. And that's not just me saying that. That's your members of his cabinet believed that, very senior people in the White House believed that if he'd been 20 years younger, he just would have been more involved, day to day. Um, and um, and as a result, the people around him did have like more authority. People like Chief of Staff Ron Klain, and then Steve Ricchetti and Mike Donilon, these longtime aides, Jake Sullivan, the First Lady's office. Also, I think sort of helped fill that vacuum. And so, yeah, I think the staff, in many ways, was more empowered because of his limitations.
This episode of Can We Please Talk is presented by our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Delicious tasting coffee since 2009. They've been our proud sponsor. You see the promo code there. Look at this. They sent me this beautiful kit right here. Listen to that. Listen to that seal coming out, right? What's in it? Environmentally safe, compostable K-Pods. I love the dark Mexican blend. You can go to their website right now, take the quiz. That quiz is going to put you with a flavor profile. Listen to that sound of the coffee that you're going to be matched up with. Go to freshroastedcoffee.com. Click the link right now in our show notes. You can see it right there. Click that link. It's going to take you to the site. When you get to checkout, use our promo code, Can We Please Get 20? All one word, Can We Please Get 20, 20. You're going to get 20% off your first purchase. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com, our official sponsor of the Can We Please Talk podcast. Yeah, it's a very good question because that's a lot of the comments on our YouTube channel, Nick, about who's running the country, who's signing the auto pen. So it's a very good question, Nick. Alex, I did want to ask you because we were talking about this off. I'll bring it over here. He's a friend of the show, Jake Tapper. We love Jake here. And Jake is the co-author of this book. I'm so happy that you mentioned at the beginning of how the relationship came in terms of how to write this book. You guys were friendly, but not really. So now let me ask you this without burying Jake, obviously, because Jake is very well known. He's getting a lot of ire right now from everywhere to the point where, I mean, he's going on Stephen A. Smith's show, Megyn Kelly's show. Every comment is about who is this Jake Tapper? What has CNN done with this Jake Tapper? Because Democrats all feel like this is an attack on, like, as you said, a person who's no longer president of the United States. So I wanted to ask you, is there a two-parter here, which is the worst thing to do, Alex? The first one is about the shield like that Jake provides in the cover of it, while you can kind of be the co-author of this. If you take us a little bit more inside of that relationship and how that was going to be planned, because I'm sure people talked about on the book tour, hey, they're gonna want Jake, they're gonna be asking more. Alex, you can kind of fly a little bit under the radar while also promoting it. But the second part of it is like the holding on to information, because as you guys said, you want to get it out as fast as you can. But even the Daily Show and others have criticized you guys for sitting on this. You're giving a little smile because I know we all saw that Jon Stewart clip. What do you make of that dynamic of, hey, we were trying to do this in real time and we just couldn't get it out? It's 24/7 news cycle, so we decided to put it all into one book. Give me some of your thoughts about first your co-author and the heat that he's getting, or at least the cover that he provides, and then the second part about the hypocrisy. How do you answer those questions of the hypocrisy of sitting on the information, or at least perceived to have sat on the information?
I think a lot of the shit Jake gets is bullshit. And as someone that was worked on the book with him and saw, like, honestly, was just like incredulous at how hard and how fast he works. And how, unflinching he was on this story. I find it like frustrating. It's like one of those things where in some interviews I want to like speak up more and be like this, defend him, but also like he can defend himself. But it has made for this like weird, dynamic sometimes where like the interviewer, me on the Megyn Kelly show, especially where she was like hammering him for 25 minutes. And I even tried to get in one time and she was like, no, 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 I'll get to you. And it was, but I also find it frustrating because, especially the right wing criticism of Jake, I find frustrating because, when you're on any beat, the reporters that the White House or the people you're covering like and don't like, the suck ups, the lazy ones, all these things. Like the Biden White House did not like Jake Tapper, and and not because he was unfair, but just because he was fearless about like pointing out when they were messing up. And I just so when he suggested the book, it never even the level and the fact that they have to keep pointing to their best hit on him, which he has apologized for, is from 2020. And not at all when Joe Biden was president. I think sort of speaks to the flimsiness of their argument, in my opinion. And yeah, so in terms of like the sort of dynamic, with him taking the heat, or being like sort of a heat shield, it's funny because my philosophy here the entire time was it's very easy to get wrapped up in like ego. Oh, they're inviting Jake, but not me. Or, Jake's getting more questions and not me. Oh, they want Jake to do the audiobook, not me. But like my entire philosophy for the entire book tour was let whatever is going to sell more books, like let's do it. And if, Jake is more famous than me. So if that's what happens, that's what happens. And the second part of your question about why we held on to this information and I mean, if I knew any of this during the election, I would have reported it. The truth is that we like reported this after the election. Every almost all this reporting with maybe a handful of interviews beforehand, but almost all this reporting is from after the election. And listen, it is, if you know anything about book publishing, it is crazy fast to have started a book in November and have it published in May, which is what we did. So we wanted to try to get it out as fast as possible. We didn't sit on anything during the campaign. And I would have loved to have broken many of these stories during the campaign.
Alex, I first want to commend you just on just your reflectiveness, just talking about just like personally where you are with the book and fame levels, all that silliness. Although to be fair, you're the one here and Jake is not, so you are plenty famous to me. Um, Something we talk about on this show a lot is the construct of our two primary political parties, and in light of the 2024 election and arguably the 2016 election, do you get the sense that the Democratic Party is a little more monolithic in the way that they position their key players? And I mean that in the sense of Joe Biden was the considered leader of the party. And there was really, it seemed, outside view, no interest in trying to move away from that particular figure. And then obviously the 2024 debate happens. Whereas the Republicans, and maybe they're in the same trap now with Trump, 2015 really, there seemed to be a recognition of, okay, that's the new flavor. We have to pivot that way because that seems to be sort of the taste of our party supporters at this point. So is essentially the question, do the Democrats suffer from being a bit monolithic and not receptive to different leadership and a willingness to change, as opposed to Republicans? Again, I'm not bringing politics into this. I'm just looking at two different parties and sort of their strategies with embracing different leadership.
That's a great question. I think the last election is a clear sign that Democrats were not responsive to their voters. Whereas, to your point, the Republican Party, while they have, basically all become more Trumpy and all those things, you could also just say like, well, they've become more responsive to their voters. I think sometimes it gets framed as it's all just fealty to one man, and there is something to that. But they're also, to your point, like this is the new flavor. And the Democratic Party saw the polls that said Joe Biden is too old, saw the polls that people were dissatisfied with the border and with the economy. And I think in some ways their fear and sincere fear of Trump led them to be like, as you said, like monolith, like this, like hyper risk averse. And just like we just got to go with like Joe Biden won in 2020, it worked, so like we got to just like stick with that. And the elites of the Democratic Party were not responsive to their voters, and that is and they made sure that there weren't going to be any sort of messy democracy in 2024 when they essentially, you know, for lack of a better term, like they rigged the Democratic primary. They tried to kick Dean Phillips off ballots. They didn't allow any debates. They drove RFK Jr. out of the party. They eventually were very heavy-handed in making sure that Joe Biden was going to be the nominee and punish anybody that said anything otherwise. And that is, for a party that says they're saving democracy, it's not very democratic.
That was a lot of the talking points on the other side. Alex, I 100% agree with that. All right, Alex, at the beginning of this, you heard the clip of you and the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And again, I want to quote, every White House, regardless of party, is capable of deception, excuse me. So speaking of that, and you talked a lot about, covering this White House and how do we actually get to ask the correct questions and frame this, something that Casey Hunt and I have gone back and forth about, arguing about this. How do you frame questions? You ask it. You ask it the proper way regardless of whether or not your access will be cut off, you ask it. You have to ask it. How do journalists that are listening right now, how do they heed Alex Thompson's words and do better, not only covering this administration, but future administrations?
My boss Mike Allen always has a line, which is that if you only about covering White Houses in particular, but just anyone that's powerful is if you only write what they want, they never have to deal with you. There is this, especially in like the, yeah, we're all very competitive. I think like the fear of losing access drives more decision making, even subtle decisions that we make more than journalists would like to admit. Um, but I just say like, the com, if your main sources are the press and comms teams, you're not doing it right. Like your main sources need to be the other people, and then you need to go to the comms and press teams for comment. The comms and press teams are not there to be candid. They're not. They have a job to do. Hopefully they never lie explicitly, although we know that that's not always or even often the case. But yeah, like go, just try to find out what as much you can about what's happening from people that are not on the press and comms team. And like I and I'm sure you feel this way. It's like there's always going to be another story. Like fear of losing access, I think just don't you don't have to like come in with guns blazing every single day. But if you got the goods, you got the goods, and like don't be scared about being cut off on access.
That is the tagline of this episode. If you got the goods, you got the goods. Alex Thompson, you can see the book over his left shoulder, Original Sin. Go get it wherever books are sold. He's also a fantastic national politics correspondent over at Axios. Alex, I can't thank you enough. We're going to do our best here to help you get to that rise of fame that you want to succeed and achieve. So thank you for coming on the program. Continued success to you, and please stay safe.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.